Good morning, everyone, again. I think the session for today, we there are students who normally do, especially those who are doing qualitative studies, and those who are especially those who are doing qualitative studies, and some of the students who are doing quantitative studies. We can analyze data in various ways. I think today I want us to focus more on um, content analysis so that to understand what is content analysis is, and also touch a little bit on thematic analysis, because there are these two concepts that are more sometimes we use them interchangeably, but they differ. So, but I think the focus of my presentation today is going to be more on content analysis, because at the end of the day, if you do your content analysis, then you can also develop themes and so on and so on. But what I've seen most of the students, when they tell us how they are going to analyze their data, especially qualitative data, they talk more about thematic analysis. So I'll touch on that a little bit. So we need to understand what is content analysis. Few outcomes. I think by the end of this session, we should be able to understand what is content analysis, and also be able to differentiate a little bit between qualitative and quantitative content analysis, okay? And also differentiate between the different types of content analysis, understand what is thematic content analysis, and understand what is ethnographic content analysis. I haven't put so much content in the last bullet regarding ethnographic content analysis, because I'm told now there is there's this type of ethnography which most people are doing. I think those people are doing the type of ethnography that are more on politics and all of those disciplines. They call it auto ethnography. If you have time, I think it should have been available. I'm not sure if the thesis could be available to you, to some of you guys. When you look at the work which has been done, I think most of us are familiar that there's someone who graduated, I think, this week from another institution, prominent politician in South Africa. I think he has. I'm told that he has used, when I read the brief. I haven't read the whole thesis, but when I read the brief, I've seen that when they summarize, he said he has used auto ethnographic, So yeah, so if you can have a chance to look at that, then maybe you can learn more about that if you are more on content analysis. Maybe there's something you can learn from the thesis. I'm not sure. I haven't seen the thesis myself, and I don't think it's yet online, because the person graduated, I think, this week or last week. I can't remember. But yeah, there is. I think going forward next year, I need to beef this aspect of ethnographic content analysis and get more information around it. But yeah, for now, let's quickly look at the introduction. Basically, content analysis could be referred to document analysis. In my case, I think I've done research, and that research, I'm even having the document in front of me. I refer to it as a document analysis of this. In fact, I've done a document analysis of the school code of conduct for few learners around few schools around Gauteng. So I refer to it as a document analysis, okay? But when I wrote out the manuscript and submitted for publication and all of this, I explained what is a document analysis, and also how did I analyze the results. Then I used the word content analysis. So yeah, I've tried to correct that a little bit, but sometimes we refer to it as document analysis, because most of the time what you normally do, when you do content analysis, you go and get certain documents, is it? For example, if I want to say, I want to do a study and maybe try to understand maybe the manifestos of the different parties from this year up to that year. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to collect those documents. I'm going to collect those manifestos, is it, of the different parties. All right. then that's going to be my document which I'm going to analyze. So how do I going to analyze it? I'll look at the content. Okay. So sometimes we use the two phrases simultaneously, or yeah. But this material could be in different form. I've just mentioned an example of the form on which you can collect your document from. It could be a public research. It could be in the form of textbooks, could be films, could be diaries, could be reports or artifacts. Okay. I can go and take maybe some of the public research speeches. Okay. And say, okay, maybe I want to check if we are going for the following what you call it, the elections, local government elections. Then I say, okay, I want to collect data starting, I'm not sure whether it's in April or June. Sometimes I'm confused with the local government elections. But let's say, let's assume, I'm just making the example. Let's say our local government elections are in June 2026. I know that they're coming next year. Then I'll say, maybe I need to collect all the political speeches. Maybe I can have a focus to say all the speeches which have been made by the presidents of the different parties from this time. Let's say from normally it's going to happen by January, immediately after New Year. The first week there, people will be busy now trying to get some votes and so on. Let's say from January up to maybe if the elections are in June, they say up to we can give it. Let's give it April. That's April, right? So the speeches which I'm going to collect, I frame them and make a focus. Not everyone's speeches, but I'm focusing more on the maybe the leaders of the parties from this time up to this time. Then if I have all those speeches, then I can start to do my content analysis. And when I do the content analysis, I can even go further and say, what am I looking at? Maybe I can have phrases or concepts which I'll be looking at. I can position the concept and say, maybe I'm looking at the concept, for example, service delivery. I know that that one is going to be the main, maybe concept like corruption. I'm not sure what is trending now, but I think I remember in some local government elections, people were still talking about concept like all the leaders were talking about making sure that there are no potholes and so on. I don't think that will come in this in the canvassing for the next local government, because I see now it's no longer a trending phrase. If I can put it in that way. I know they are there, but it's no longer like that. But let's say I'm looking at these two concepts, all right, or terms. So I'll look at each content analysis and check maybe if how many of those, for example, if I want to do a quantitative content analysis, I'll look on how many times this phrase comes from the different leaders as they are trying to get their voters, right? That will be content. That will be quantitative content analysis, because I just look at numbers, okay? Then, but I can also go deeper and look at the meaning. And when I look at the meaning, then I'll come with a qualitative content analysis. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that based on the documents, you can frame your analysis. How do you want to do this analysis? But I'll talk about this also in some of the examples as we go forward. But basically, your content could be manifest, which refers to the visible, quantifiable components of the message, okay? In other words, you can look at the message. What's the message in this leaders' manifestos or speeches, if you want to put it that way? Then we can also have the latent content, which refers to the meaning that may lie behind the manifest content. Think about that. Latent, definitely. It's about the meaning, right? If I'm listening to the speech, I'm not only looking at the manifest, all right, on the message or on the concept itself, but I want to also go further and look at the meaning. What lies behind this service delivery? Okay? But what normally happens is that I think sometimes when we look at these things, I'm not criticizing anyone, but when we listen to this, some of these um, points being mentioned, people don't give them meaning. People say, we'll make sure that they service delivery. What does it mean? Remember that you and I, we've got a different understanding about service delivery. Someone, if you say service delivery, they mean that they understand that they need to get all the basics, okay? In other words, they are not supposed to pay for those basics. That's their meaning and understanding. But to someone else, they believe that getting these services, there should be some cost effect around it. But that cost effect should not be heavy. Okay, so we are sitting on the two directions now, especially in South Africa, honestly. Okay, but yeah, so what they normally do, I think all of us, we've been listening to some of them most of the time. They don't actually elaborate. If you say, we'll ensure that there will be service delivered, what do you mean? Because if they can start, for example, try to, when they canvas for all those support and stuff, and try to unpack also the latent content, people also will understand. So, okay, these services must be offered to some of us or to all of us, but there should be some, there are things which we need to do as citizens. Okay? But I don't want to go deeper there because I was listening to something, I think even yesterday, in fact, I think most of you were listening to that in one area around Krugersdorp. I think it's around Krugersdorp, and I know the area where there was a lot of protests and all of those things. But when the city indicated to say in the past, they've offered services to those people. But the problem is that the payment is very low. And I was also surprised with the percentage. I said, don't know, but yeah. But what I'm trying to say is that we need also to look at those aspects. But look at this example, which I've also put there as an additional example. I said manifest content could be a picture which depicts a woman carrying a pile of wood on her head. That's more, it's on the base or on the surface, is it? We look at this woman, then this woman is carrying maybe a pile of wood on her head. But if you go deeper and you do a latent concept analysis deeper, you want to get the meaning behind it. Yes, we know that that could be an aspect of stereotyping, okay? That could be, if you give a deeper meaning, it also can lead to aspects, for example, like living within the poverty line and also maybe not having the services available and so on. So in other words, when you look at this picture, you can interpret it and give it different meanings, all right? But you can also look at the surface part of it, all right? What is actually content analysis? I think I've made some few points around content analysis, but I want us to hear it from the scholars. I think I've got something from the scriber.com, which says content analysis is a research method used to identify patterns. All right. In other words, in your content, you look at the patterns. I've just made an example about this one. The speeches by the leaders of political parties. What patterns I'll be looking at? I'll be looking, for example, how many times do they refer to the foreign phrases within their speeches? And also, I could frame it according to a certain year period. Okay. To conduct this content analysis, you systematically collect data from a set of text that could be in a form of written, oral, or visual. I've just put some of the visuals there. I know that they're not much more visible, but based on this, you can also do a little bit of content analysis, all right? And also the other one, you can also do a little bit of content analysis. But when you look at Airy and et al., they describe content analysis as a research method applied to written or visual materials to analyze characteristics of the material. I think that is clear. Let's quickly look at quantitative and qualitative content analysis. Okay. Quantitative content analysis, you know that if you talk about quantitative, definitely we are talking about more on an approach which is more deductive. Okay, definitely it's going to be deductive, and also quantitative content analysis, it relies on an existing theory. We know, we spoke about that one to say when you look at quantitative studies, there should be an existing theory, but when you look at qualitative studies, there is no existing theory. That's why we spoke about from deductive and from inductive, okay? This one, quantitative, is more from a deductive approach in nature. But there are steps. I just want to quickly look at the steps to conduct quantitative content analysis. What are those steps? Definitely, you need to look at your research questions. You need to also to conceptualize and hypothesis formulation. You need also to have sampling and sampling unitizing of that sample. All right. What does sampling mean? Sampling involves the identifying and selecting the material intended to analyze. You need to sample. Okay? Think about this. When you do this content analysis, you can't analyze all the documents. You can have a sample. For example, in that example which I've indicated, I've said, based on the leader's speeches, I'm going to sample. How do I sample them? I'm focusing more on the speeches which they've made from January up to April. It's a sample. I'm not focusing on the speeches which they've made during the national elections, or which we had last year. No, I'm just focusing 2026, but I'm framing it over 3 to 4 months. It's a sample for me, okay? Then you also need, in regards to unitizing, you include deciding on the units text that needs to be classified or categorized. Okay, so I can also have categorization around that. The next step, we talk about coding scheme development. I think we're going to talk about coding scheme development going forward. And also, I think we will understand what is coding, what does actually means, okay? But remember that the coding scheme, if you have already do your sampling framing, you know what document you are going to use, you need to tell us how are you going to code. Okay, so you need also to have a coding scheme. Sometimes I was looking at the one which I've done some years ago. Definitely the coding scheme, I can have different ways of coding. I can code according to scale. Okay, I can use maybe phrases like high, medium, or low. If, for example, if I use those three, let's say I'm using high, medium, and low as coding, then I'll take each document which I'm trying to analyze, then I'll code it. The items, I'll code them according to this scale, high, medium, and low. Let's say, for example, I'm looking at this type of a content analysis. I'll make an example about school code of conduct. Maybe I got a statement where I want to find out from this school code of conduct if when they design it, after they've completed the school code of conduct, I want to find out that this school code of conduct has been signed by all learners. All right, that's an item. Okay, then I'll say I want to check if the code of conduct is signed by all learners. That's an item. There's a text I'll be looking. All right, let's talk about text now, because if you talk about the item, we think that maybe it's a questionnaire. That's a text I'll be looking in the code school of conduct. So what I'm looking at, I'll look if there's a section which provides an opportunity for it to be signed by all learners. If I'm doing a school code of conduct of 30 schools, okay, then it means that my coding, I can use for this one, maybe let's use a code no, all right, which I can even give a numerical. I can say it's 0, then yes, I can give it 1. In other words, for each of them in my coding scheme, for each of the item or the text which I'm looking at, and one of them is the code of conduct signed by the learners. Then if, for example, school A, I realize that there is a portion in the school code of conduct which give an option for learners to sign, then I'll give that school 1 in regards to that text. Then I'll go to school B. I'll do the same thing. If there is no option which gives the students learners to sign the school of conduct, I'll give it 0. So after I've done all of them, 30 of them, based on this text, then I can also do my quantitative analysis now to say, okay, based on this, how many no's do I have from the 30 primary schools? Based on this text, which asks to check if the learners are given opportunity to sign the school of conduct. If I have 15 no's, then I can give a numerical 15. If I have maybe 5 years, then I'll give it 5. So what that says, when I do my analysis and my interpretation of the data there and there, then I can do a better interpretation around that. But I've started with my coding, and I've used a certain scale. Okay, so that's how we normally do it. Well, I'm not sure if you can do it through technology. I think technology can also do a better work, but most of the time, like I've said, when you do your qualitative studies, sometimes it's not so much data to work on. You can also do it manually and all of this. Okay, but when you look at Creswell alludes that coding is a process of segmenting and labeling text to form descriptions and broad themes in the data. Then from there, you do your data collection. After you've coded, you do after you've developed your coding scheme, then you collect your data, then you can do your coding. Then from there, you can write your findings and also your conclusion. Those are the few steps you can also follow there. Yeah, definitely. In regarding to coding, step 6, I think I've done an example on how to code. All right. Where sometimes most of the time we use colors and all of those things, but you can also allow a scale, like the example I've done with this item of this text, where we check if the school of conduct, they give an option for learners to sign for those school of conduct. Then I've used that scale of no, which are awarded 0, then yes, which are awarded 1 point there. Okay, I think I've done it. I don't have to go back to that one. But there are different types of coding. Before I can move to the next slide. Well, we identify 3 of them. I think I'll update my slides and put them under the notes there. The first one is an open coding, whereby it involves basically breaking down data into smaller and meaningful segments. All right. It also assigns descriptive codes to those segments. I think there's the one I've done now is more open, because for each item or for each of the school of conduct, you give a descriptive code. Okay. And it's a process which has to do with exploratory, and sometimes it aligned to qualitative. But there's another type of coding. They call it Excel coding, a qualitative data analysis technique, which focus on establishing relationships between codes and categories, so that as to get a deeper understanding of the data. I think all of us want to fall in that type of coding, because we want to get the understanding, a deeper meaning of the data itself, like the phrase I've used insofar as the speeches of the political leaders. You know, if it's you talk about service delivery, we need to get a deeper meaning on that of that. Okay. The other one we refer to it as selective coding, focus on identifying core categories that act as actual themes. Okay. Qualitative content analysis. Definitely, we know that the quantitative content analysis aligned to deductive, but this one, it aligns more to qualitative to inductive approach. So it also relates to relational analysis. We'll talk about what is relational analysis in the following slides. And also it begins with specific observation and you build towards a general pattern. And the categories could emerge from the observation insofar as qualitative content analysis. Theories emerge from direct field experience. Remember that always when we talk about qualitative, the theories are not in existence compared to quantitative. So they are going to develop from the field experience. Then we can build up a little bit of a theory around that. There are two types of content analysis. We refer to them as conceptual. All right, the first one is a conceptual content analysis. Then you also have the other one, I think I should have it somewhere, relational content analysis. So we are going to talk about these two types of content analysis in detail. Let's look at the first one, the conceptual content analysis. Basically, conceptual analysis is whereby a concept is chosen for examination and the analysis involved quantifying and tiling its presence. Okay. In other words, you like we have done with that example. How many times does this phrase comes out from a text? Okay. If we can still make use of that example of the political leaders of the political party speeches. How many times does this phrase is been mentioned during their speech? Okay, that has to do with concept analysis, where you quantify and telling the presence of the concept or theme or the weight in a speech, all right, or in the document, if you want to put it that way. Further concept analysis involves quantifying and counting its presence. I think I've just mentioned that one. It focuses on the number of times a concept in a set of data and focuses generally on explicit data. Okay, if you look at the next point there, it says concept analysis. We just mentioned that one. It focuses on the number of times a concept is said in a data set and focus generally on explicit data. We are going to talk about two types of content. We are going to talk about in other words, the content can be, or concept can be grouped, or terms can be grouped into two aspects. We refer to them as explicit and implicit. So we are going to look at that also, okay? So that we understand this conceptual content analysis. But when you look at concepts or terms may either be explicit or implicit. What does implicit mean? What does explicit content means? Okay, let's understand this in this example. For example, I've just put the example also there. Explicit content, in the explicit content, data is transparent and easy to identify. It's easy to identify the data. For example, the aspect I was talking about here. If you look at an example where I was talking about the political leaders in regards to their speeches, which they gave between Jan to April for the local government. All right. If you look at that, if you have their speeches, it's going to be easy for you to get explicit content, to say, okay, how many times does this word come up or this phrase come out from their speeches. Then you're able to do the tallying and the number. It becomes more explicit. Okay. In other words, my understanding is that you are not going to give any meaning. All right. The other important about explicit content is that there is no meaning which you need to give there. Okay. It's just to say how many times. You just have to give the numerical aspect of it. I've given this example there. I'm not sure if it's going to make sense to understand explicit content. In the example where I've indicated a conversation between two people who are talking to each other. Okay, the first one I refer to that person as Pule. The other one is Jacob. Listen to what Pule is saying. Pule says, he told me that he has 4 cars. I don't know who told him. I don't know earlier with whom Pule was having a conversation, right? But Jacob says, what are the models of his cars? Pule responded by saying, the first one is a Toyota Corolla. The second one is a BMW. The third is a Hyundai. Then, unfortunately, I cannot remember the last car's model. In other words, Pule says he can remember only the model of the 3 cars, all right? But he can't remember the last one. But if you look at this data, based on the conversation, it is clear that the word of phrase cars has been used almost 3 times. All right. You look at the first conversation by Pule, he mentioned the word cars. It appears there. When Jacob responds, also used or referred or used the word cars. Then Pule also, to indicate that he's not aware about the other model, he also used the word cars. So this phrase comes almost 3 times. Therefore, it is clear that in this conceptual, it is more conceptual because it's explicit. It has to do with counting on how many times does this phrase comes up, right? That's why I say it is clear that in this conceptual content analysis, we can deduce that cars are the central point of this conversation. These people, when they talk amongst themselves, Pule and Jacob, their focus is more about cars, okay? We can also perform maybe frequency analysis. How many times? Then we can also give a percentage to say, okay, maybe based on the whole conversation, almost 9% or 10% or 90% or whatever in the conversation, the word cars comes up. Okay? This data is without interpretation. In other words, you can't even interpret this data because there's nothing which is the focus area here. The main focus area, it's about and them themselves talking about the aspect of cars. Then you can also count how many times the word phrase comes. Then the data becomes more explicit. I'm not sure if this example makes sense, because remember that all this, what we are sharing with you guys in regards of the concept content analysis, in your writing up, you need also, if you say you're going to analyze data, your data using content analysis, those are the things we need to look at. Okay. We said that the concept can be either explicit or implicit. Let's look at the implicit concept now. Implicit content is whereby the implicit data requires some form of interpretation. In other words, now you have data, you need to give a little bit of interpretation now. Remember that explicit content, there's no need for interpretation. All right, it's just the frequency or the sequence, how many times this phrase or concept comes up. But in regards to implicit, it's whereby the empirical data requires some form of interpretation. and it's often a subjective nature. All right. Remember that when you interpret data, it is subjective. Okay. If, for example, let's say it's also quantitative for that case, then give you the qualitative data. Maybe we're looking at gender. Then from there, we give a descriptive analysis of that to say maybe female, male. All right, let's use these two genders. How many of the participants were female? Then you give percentage there, the number and the percentage, okay? How many were males? Give number and percentage. Then you said, interpret this data. Your interpretation won't be the same like my interpretation. It's more subjective, okay? Because you have your own understanding about this data. I got my own understanding. That's why in regards to implicit content, it's more subjective in nature. The implicit concepts are complicated and can be based on subjectivity. I think we've mentioned that one. This implicit concept could be coded by using tools such as dictionaries and so on. So in order for you to understand it, you can use certain tools, okay? Look at this example now so that you can understand this implicit concept. There's a conversation between two people here. It is Psycho and Morgan. Listen to what Psycho is saying there. He says, "Hello, how can I help you?" Morgan responded, "Yes, I am a first-year student in the Department of Law, and I'm not sure which librarian I can get assistance from regarding my assignment." Immediately, Psycho responded by saying, "Sure, follow me, I will show you." Then Morgan said, "Okay, thank you." Then we don't know what happens after. It's fine. Let's leave it there. But when you look at this now, from these exchanges of conversation, the two speakers could either be at the library, they could be at the campus, maybe around the department, or they could be maybe moving around or maybe at the cafeteria or wherever. But basically, through their conversation, it can tell you that it has to do with learning, all right? Something to do with learning, okay? And that could happen, hopefully, maybe in the environment where learning could take place, like a university and so on and so on, okay? That's our assumptions. But the explicit data shows or indicates that Psycho is helping Morgan to find the right person who could assist him regarding his request. Okay? This is a form of the data. So this form of the data is more explicit since it doesn't require no interpretation. Okay? So it is more explicit also. But remember that I can also give my own interpretation like I've done. My assumptions is also there. Okay? But what I'm trying to say, we need to understand the two types of content of concepts. It could be either explicit or implicit, okay? Look at the steps for conducting conceptual analysis. Let's quickly look at some of those steps. There are not so many, but we want to conduct a conceptual content analysis. Okay? Remember that when we spoke about the conceptual content analysis, we said it is more aligning to quantitative, and also the data is about counting how many times or sequence that information comes up. Let's look at the steps. Just want to move my cursor here. It's just going to freeze. I don't know why. Here are some few of the steps. We just briefly go through them. The first one, it says you need to decide about the level of analysis. All right. In other words, you need to decide whether you're going to use words, sentences, or themes, and so on. Before deciding about this level of analysis, the research questions should be identified. And you need also to choose a sample. That's the first step. Or the hypothesis should be there, or you could have identified them. Okay. The second step, definitely decide how many concepts to code for. You may decide to allow flexibility by adding categories through the coding process, or alternatively, you can stick with predefined sets of categories. Okay. In other words, you may decide. For example, in that example we have two categories which we wanted to do our analysis, or concept which we want to do our analysis on. We have service delivery, we have corruption. So you can decide how many. Okay. Or you stick with all those two, and others maybe they'll definitely there will be no others which will be coming. You decide which ones. Okay. And remember that, for example, if you refer to your research questions, definitely some of those concepts will be coming from your research questions. Okay. Step 3, you can also decide whether to code for existing or frequency of the concept. Coding for existence, a concept is counted only once. Okay. So you must be able to count that concept once. That's frequency. You can't count it more than once. If it appears, and no matter how many times it appears, you count it once. Okay. You cannot say, for example, in this text, all right, this concept is coming twice. Then you count it twice. You count it once. Should be once because it's the same concept, is it? Okay. Coding for frequency, it's whereby a concept will be counted according to the number of times it appears. Coding for existence, you count it once. But coding for frequency, it's how many times. Okay. The next step, definitely decide on how you will distinguish amongst concepts. You decide if text will be coded as they appear or as the same as they appear in different forms, right? For example, you can decide if you have if this concept comes up. Let's say, for example, as you are looking at the text, there's a concept called happy or happiness. So you decide. You decide whether this concept, you count them as one concept or count them as separate concepts. The next step, definitely you develop rules for coding the text, and the rules for translation of the text into codes should be developed also. This will also ensure that the coding process is more organized and consistent. Step 6, decide what to do with the irrelevant information. Then you code the text. Then from there, you analyze your results. And when you code the text, you also try to manage errors if they are there. You can code your tests using different software and so on. Then you can also draw conclusions and you can generalize. And also you can look at the trends and patterns, right? Throughout all of this. I think you don't have to memorize, colleagues, these steps, but what we want you, when you do your writing up, if you say you have done content analysis, you need to tell us maybe if, for example, the concept were explicit or implicit in your writing and what is content analysis, and also tell us which steps or how did you follow the steps on analyzing your content. Okay. And also maybe you can source it from some scholars, because many scholars, they talk about the steps to say, in my analysis of the content, I follow the steps by this author. Then you indicate the step, then you put a practical application on how each steps was followed in your study. But now the aspect which I want to talk about now, remember that we have two documents, okay? You have your research proposal. In your research proposal, definitely, you are not going to be more explicit, okay? In other words, when I talk about explicitity, you are not going to tell us more about maybe some of the steps about these steps, but you can tell us that in analyzing your data, you are going to do content data analysis. Okay? Then we can give a reason why and all of this if your research proposal word count allows you. But when you do the research report now, it's where you indicate aspect in detail now. Okay? Because now at least we have a clear understanding that your collected data is going to be analyzed using this type of analysis. If you say thematic analysis, definitely you tell us what is thematic analysis, okay? And you don't have to be more explicit, especially in your research proposal, like I said. But when you come to the report, it's where you break these things in detail now. And I think most of the time in our research report, sometimes it's chapter 3, it's where you have a section under research methodology where you have data collection. You have enough time to tell us how did you collect data. You have used content analysis, and you tell us what is content analysis. You also indicate if it was more of an implicit concept which we use or explicit, and also how did you, which steps have you followed to analyze this data, and also you cite the author and so on. So it can be in that form of writing. Okay, let's quickly look at what is relational content analysis. Please, colleagues, you bear with me. The font size it's a bit small there. I wanted to put everything in one slide so that I don't move to the next slide. But basically, relational content analysis is whereby the start is identifying concept, all right, that is present in a given text, and then explore the relations between the identified concept, all right? In other words, relationally concept analysis, you identify concepts which are there, all right, in the text. Then from there, you explore the relations between the identified concept. Okay, I think we look at some of those concepts as examples. Basically, the relational content analysis is looking at numbers. It assesses the relationship between different concepts and how they are connected and the context in which they appear. Remember that content analysis, you also need to look at the context. That's why when I was trying to frame this example, all right, where you can use content analysis, also you have to indicate the context. And the context I've said in our first example, it's about the speeches. That's the context. I'm not looking at anything. I'm just looking at the speeches which they make within a certain framework or frame time. All right. In other words, I'm not concerned about other things. I'm just focusing on the speeches. And it also same as your rational content analysis. It's almost same like your conceptual content analysis. And it could also, the concept can also be chosen for examination. The difference here in the rational content analysis is that it explores the relationship between concepts. Remember that the other one, all right, it does not explore the relationship between the concepts, how these concepts are related. The other one, definitely, I think it should be your conceptual content analysis, all right? It's not concerned about the issue of the relationship between the concepts, how these two concepts are related. It's just in the conceptual work, we're not concerned about that one. We just to know how many we want to see the sequence, if I can put it that way. How many times does this phrase come, or these phrases comes during their speeches. For example, service delivery or corruption. But when you look at the relational content analysis, we want to check the relationship there. All right. In other words, now we go deeper now. We want to check how these concepts are related. What's the relationship between? What meaning can you give? If, for example, you listen to the concept, which has been mentioned, or the term, what meaning can you give? What relation is there? Okay. So in other words, it's more of deeper analysis. We have different types of relational content analysis. Let's quickly look at some of them briefly. The first one, it talks about affect extraction. It's when concepts are assessed according to emotional attributes. Normally, we use the scales or rating scales. In other words, affect extraction, it is to do more about emotional attributes. Okay? But when you look at the other type of relational content analysis, the proximity analysis, we identify explicit terms and the patterns in terms of how they occur in the text. It also investigates the relationship between terms and the aim to group these to extract themes and developing meaning. All right, it's more of explicit. It is used when we are looking for hard facts. That's proximity. In other words, we are not looking for anything else, but we look for these points or these facts rather than emotional or cultural or contextual factors. In other words, in this example, as the people are putting their speeches, we are not concerned about the emotions. In other words, our analysis is not the emotion to say how people are going to feel and so on and so on. We just look at the facts. How many times did this person or speaker allude to this phrase? That's all. It's a fact. We are not concerned about the emotions, how the recipients are going to react to this speech. We are not concerned about that. Okay. Example, I'm just giving that example of proximity. If you are to analyze the separate, sorry, I think it's coming again here. If you are to analyze the speeches of political parties during the election period, you will mostly focus only what was said and not on the implication and meaning. I think we've spoken about that one. All right. So, yeah. How many of us colleagues do we do a follow-up on what they've presented to us? Most of them don't do that. And that's where sometimes we, after some time, when we are having them in our platforms or when already in office, we'll say what they've promised us is not what's happening. Okay? Because we know how things have been done. Okay? It's just to have a surface understanding, but the deeper one is not being given. Maybe it's because of time and so on. But at the end of the day, is that what you are concerned about, it's not about any meaning or the implication. We are concerned about the facts. Okay, that's all we want to hear. Then we have another type of relational content analysis. We refer to it as cognitive mapping analysis. It involves taking different texts and comparing them in a visual format. In other words, now you can also have the text themselves, but you put visuals, okay? That's what cognitive mapping analysis is all about. Well, there are some steps also need to be followed when you do rational content analysis. I think some of the steps are almost similar, but in common. But the first one, it says you need to determine the type of analysis, reduce the text to categories and code for words or patterns. The next step, you explore the relationship between concepts. The concept could be analyzed for their strength or relationship or sign of relationship or direction of relationship. Okay, you also look the next step, you code the relationship, then you perform the statistical analysis, then you map out the representation, then conclude definitely. Let's go to the next slide. 3 types of qualitative content analysis according to Hish and Shannon. I think I've tried to pronounce it correctly, but they identify these 3 types of qualitative content analysis. The first one, they call it the conventional content analysis. Then they also have what you call the direct content analysis. Then they also have the summative content analysis. Okay, let's quickly try to understand each one of them. Conventional content analysis is used specifically whereby the aim is to explore a certain phenomena. Maybe it could be a case of a theory or a case of research literature. Okay, it is in this approach the researcher works inductively. Okay, as long as you see the word inductive, what does it mean? It means it aligned to qualitative studies, is it? It's more inductive. Avoidance of predefined categories. Instead, the categories that are created emerge from the analysis data. That's more inductive. Conventional content analysis, in other words, when you look at the categories, they'll come from the data which you have analyzed. I think we just spoke about, for example, the mixed method research. Those who attended some of the workshops. What we said that in mixed method research, after, for example, if my main focus when I collect my data, it was quantitative, then after that, I'll analyze that quantitative data, and based on my analysis of my quantitative data, it will inform the qualitative approach or the qualitative data collection instrument. In other words, I don't formulate these 2 instruments at the same time. I formulate only one based on my main approach. If I see, okay, in my mixed method research methods, my main starting point of collecting data, it is quantitative. Then I do everything about quantitative. I analyze the data and so on. And based on my empirical data analysis, then that will inform if I need to do qualitative tools for getting more feedback on my data. Okay. The same thing if you start with qualitative. Now, when you look at this approach of conventional content analysis, it tells you definitely that the themes definitely are not created in advance. Okay, the themes, they are going to come out, they are going to emerge from the analyzed data. In other words, after you've analyzed the data, it's where you are going to have identified the themes. And the main advantages of this conventional content analysis is that information is directly generated from the participant without imposing preconceived theoretical perspective. In other words, the information which you are going to analyze and generate, it comes from the participant themselves. Okay? These are some of the steps to be followed. While you start to read all them, the step 1, you read all the data to get the whole. Then step 2, you derive codes by highlighting key thoughts and concepts. Then the next step, we label your codes. Then from there, you create categories or subcategories by sorting and organizing the codes into clusters based on their relationship. That's how we normally do it, definitely. That's a conventional content analysis. And yeah, I'm told that softwares, now they can do all these things for you, okay? But what I always do from my side, I do it the manual way, because sometimes it's more qualitative studies, and in qualitative studies, definitely you are not dealing with more data, so we can also do things manually. And when I work on them on a manual, I always have colors, you know. That's what I always do. I'll have colors, and based on the colors, for example, if I'll start with my coding, I'll look at the theme or the phrase which are appearing from each participant. Okay, then I'll give a color. Okay, then if, for example, I have 5, let's say I have 7 participants. Okay, then I'll start to do my coding. I think I've spoken about this with you guys. I do my coding. I use colors. Okay, I may have printouts. I can maybe have charts and so on. I think nowadays I like to use charts so that I see the bigger picture. Then I'll put them in a boardroom. If I'm working at a boardroom, I also remind myself about the one which I've done on my latest publication. You know, I have to put all the charts on the board on the board today in the boardroom. Then I'll just put them around there. Then I have to use colors. And coding using colors, you are able to have better categories, because you know that if I have this red color for this phrase, if I have 9 participants, or maybe I remember that I had 20 participants for that study. So it means now I'll have participant 1 up to 20. So I'll look at each question. Question 1. And already I have, remember that now I'm talking about, they have responded to the interview, which I've done with them, okay? There's an interview, I've interviewed them, definitely. Then question 1, how did they respond? Then I start to quote. If there's a phrase which is coming in question 1, and I can see that this phrase now, it's almost a key phrase, then I'll give it a color. Let's say I give it a red, okay? Let's say the phrase, let's play around with a phrase. I don't know which phrase I can use now. Let's use the phrase discipline, okay? Then I give it red. For participant 1, question 1, the phrase comes. Then I go to participant 2, question 1. If that phrase, it does come, then I give it again red. I just give it a red color. I go through that until the last participant. If, for example, 2 of the participants or 3 of the participants, they didn't mention the word discipline in question 1, it's fine. Okay? Then from there, I'll categorize. Then I say, okay, when I look at this phrase, discipline, it could be maybe one of the theme. If I have sub-theme, I could have sub-theme going forward. Okay? Then I go to question 2. Maybe there are phrases which are coming there. Then I'll look at, sometimes we look at the relationship between the phrase, okay? Then we say, okay, maybe when I look at this relationship between the phrases which are coming out or concepts, then I can maybe categorize them, and from there I can formulate a theme. Or sometimes you formulate a theme based on a research question. But what I'm trying to say is that you need to label codes. You need also to make sure that you categorize and all do all those things. But if you do it manually, colors could be able to assist you a lot. That's the conventional content analysis, colleagues. But it also needs some reading, because remember that sometimes the text which you want to analyze using content analysis, maybe sometimes that text is more deep. It's not about counting only, is it? Okay, but the text is more deep. You need also to read a lot. That's why we say you read all the data to get the whole. Okay, you get the understanding of the data. It's not about looking at the phrases, then from there you give colors. Now you read to get the understanding. The other type of conventional content analysis, direct content analysis, it is more of a deductive, okay? Therefore, you know that direct, it aligned to qualitative studies, because it is more of a deductive approach, top-down and theory-driven. In other words, now, the theories or the concept are already there, okay? You don't have to formulate the concept, you know they are already there. It's used in studies that is aimed at extending the existing description of the phenomena. It is guided by more structured process. And some of the steps which you can follow there. Step 1, identification of the key important concept. Operational definition for the categories should be guided by the chosen theory in step 2. Step 3, data is coded and sorted into predetermined categories. In other words, the categories are determined, they're already there. But if you look at the other one, the previous one, definitely your conventional content analysis categories, they image from the analyzed data. There's a difference. In other words, especially if you align them to the types of research methods, because the other one, the conventional, is more inductive, it aligned to qualitative. Definitely, the categories are not created, but they image from the data which you have analyzed. Whereas the other one, the categories are predetermined, they're already there. Okay, that's your direct content analysis. Then from there, you identify, step 4, you identify the potential relevant data. You highlight data. Highlighted data is analyzed and grouped into categories. That's step 5. The last one, definitely, it's your summative content analysis. It is more quantitative in nature. The focus is on the counting and frequency of certain content in data. The steps which you can also follow there, you create the initial coding scheme, okay, based on theory and previous research or data. Please, colleagues, when you do content analysis, you need to have a coding scheme. There must be a coding scheme. How are you going to code the data? There must be a scheme. Okay? All right, sometimes they call it a guideline. Counting of the frequency of certain words or concepts is step 3. Calculate and compare the frequencies in relation to the total length of data. Then step 4, identify a quantify alternative by counting frequency of alternatives to the concept or weights. So if you look at the coding scheme, definitely, I think I was having an example of it. It's whereby, for example, I think it's almost similar to what I've done, where I've tried to give a sort of a coding in an example where I was saying that you also, in the text, you want also to check if the learners are given an opportunity to sign for the School of Conduct. Then I can also give a coding scheme or a coding form. Like I've said, in that case, I can try to categorize it with this coding. For example, I can give it 0, right? Or I can give it 1. In other words, if I code it as 0, it means in that School of Conduct, the way they've drafted, there is no a point or a point which indicates that the learner must sign for the School of Conduct. Because at the end of the day, how do you do it in the School of Conduct? I don't know how they do it nowadays. Maybe at the end, you have the learner signature. Simple. Then if I look at that, let's say 30 different School of Conduct, then I check in some of the school, I don't see anything where the learner can sign for the School of Conduct. Then I can give that a 0 because there's nothing. Then the one where they give an option for learners to sign for the School of Conduct, I can code it by giving a 1. Then from there you do your analysis and all of those things. So you need to have a sort of a coding scheme, okay? Then it works better for you so that there is a consistency in your content analysis. Summarizing of the 3 types of content analysis. How do you summarize those 3 types? You remember, we have the conventional, we have the direct, we also have the summative content analysis. How do you summarize both of them? Basically, your conventional content analysis starts with observation. Codes are defined during data analysis, okay? Remember that the conventional, definitely, you are able to define the codes during your analysis. The source of codes or keywords, Codes are derived from data. In other words, you get the codes from data. Look at the direct content analysis. It's theory, right? Codes are defined before data analysis. Okay, there's a difference. And remember that you spoke about this now. You spoke about conventional content analysis, all right? The conventional, it's more aligned to inductive. Inductive and also categories are generated from the analyzed data. Then you look at the other one, which is more deductive. It's more deductive, and already the categories are there. That is your direct content analysis. And also the summary tells you to say, in regards to the direct content analysis, we know that the theory is already in existence because it's more quantitative in nature. Okay, and it aligned to deductive approach. It's already there. The theory is already there. And also, that's why your codes are defined before you can even collect the data. You already have your codes. Okay? But when you look at the other one, the conventional content analysis, the codes are not there. The codes are going to image or also like your categories based on the analyzed data. In other words, it's more inductive. I like this, where it says codes are derived from theory relevant research findings. But when you look at summative content analysis, definitely it starts with keywords. Keywords are identified before and during the data analysis. All right. In other words, now it's more of the combination of the two, because you have the keywords which are there before you analyze the data. They are keywords, and also others will come during the data analysis. It's a combination. Keywords are derived from interests of researchers or relevant or review of literature. So I think this summary is just well for these types of three types of content analysis. Okay, I want us now to look at, I think we've tried to understand content analysis a little bit. Okay, so it means going forward, our writing up will be more improved in regards on how to do content analysis. Okay, and I think most of the students, they do what we call thematic analysis. Okay, let's quickly look at what is thematic analysis. Thematic analysis is a method of analyzing qualitative data. Okay, remember that content analysis, we can analyze both quantitative data, okay, and also qualitative data, both in content analysis. Okay. But in thematic analysis, it's more about qualitative data analysis. It is usually applied to a set of text, such as interview or transcript. The researcher closely examines the data to identify common themes, topics, ideas, and patterns of meaning that come up separately or repeatedly. That's according to google.com. All right. In other words, you look at the themes or concepts or patterns which are repeating themselves there. Differences, brief difference between the two. Content analysis, it is wider in its application, whereas thematic analysis, it supports deeper analysis. It brings more in-depth understanding of the studied phenomena. Okay, and that's why most of the time we opt for more about the thematic analysis. because you are able to get in-depth and deeper understanding of the phenomena which you are studying. That's thematic analysis. Whereas when you look at the content analysis, we say then it can be used for both quantitative and qualitative. I think I've mentioned that one. But when you look at thematic, it's purely qualitative in nature. So in other words, colleagues, why do we say content analysis can be used both for quantitative and qualitative? Because we can still, I think what I've done in one of the research I've conducted, I've started firstly by also collecting data quantitatively, okay, so that I could understand my participant response in a certain aspect. In other words, in the case of the School of Conduct research I've done, I had also a questionnaire for them, okay, so that I could understand and check if they understand some of the aspect relating to the School Code of Conduct. Then there were some of them, because remember that sometimes to sit with only the document without having a clue about your participant understanding, sometimes it's difficult, okay? And it's better sometimes to have that a little bit of a questionnaire for them. Well, you can even inform it with a qualitative study if you have time and so on, all right, by interviewing them. But there are some differences there. Let's look at the next one quickly. Content analysis is better suited for handling larger set of data, okay? But the other one, it is initiative in its approach to data, because the data is not a lot. I think thematic analysis is what we normally do most of the time. So even we do we interview our participant and so on, and collect data and do our transcription. Then we analyze, we code data, we give categories, then we come with themes. Because normally it's not a large number of data which you're working with. Okay, so you can apply thematic analysis because it's not so much. But if the data is huge, definitely you can apply your content analysis. Content analysis basically is straightforward for the data categorization, faster to get started with, but the other one is more inductive, in which you look at data from scratch. That's your thematic analysis. Content analysis has a clear epistemology. It provides the researcher with a routine on how to conduct research, but when you look at thematic analysis, good in exploring patterns across qualitative data. The last difference is that content analysis, it is more positivistic in its nature, but when you look at thematic, these are the overarching categories of common data across participants. In other words, you look at the categories which are coming through the participant when you analyze using thematic analysis. Well, there are a few steps which you can follow in the thematic analysis. What are those steps? The first step, definitely, you need to familiarize yourself with your data. Okay, I think all those steps, colleagues, are the ones which I've shared with you. Okay, remember that for you to have a better thematic analysis, okay, if you say I followed these steps in analyzing my data thematically, then I follow these steps according to Brown and Clark. You cite them, then you indicate the step. Okay, the first step, you can even put a sort of a figure or a diagram in your writing up. We are talking about reports now, definitely, colleagues. I'm not talking about a proposal. In your writing up for the report, you can also put a diagram. So, okay, these are the steps which I followed according to this author. Then you indicate the step. The first one, You say you familiarize yourself with your data. How did you familiarize yourself with the data? Then you share, involving transcription and noting down initial ideas. In other words, for me to familiarize myself with this data, what I've done, I've collected the data definitely, then I've read the data, then I've transcribed the data, then I look at the transcription, all right, so that I understand what is included in this data, okay? Then from there, you go to the next step. You say generating initial codes from data. Then you indicate to us how did you generate these codes from the data. Then you share the step with us. Okay. And I'm telling you, colleagues, if, for example, all these steps you want to follow them in your thematic analysis, you should have conducted those aspects. And it becomes easy to come with a writing up, honestly. Okay, because those are things you've done, is it? How did you analyze your data thematically? Then you tell us. All right. Then the next step, searching for themes by collecting codes into potential themes. If, for example, you say to us, you have conducted thematic analysis and you have used this program. Let's say, for example, you say you have used Atlas.ai, all right, as a program to analyze, to code your data. Then you take us through all that process also, okay? Or if, for example, when you use this analyzing tool, there was a statistical person who assisted you with that. You tell us about that also, because sometimes in other words, you must give us the whole process, what happened. Okay? Then from there, we know that definitely after the statistical consultant have done data analysis for you using this program, you had another meeting where the analysis was shared with you. So all those things, they must come up within these steps so that you're able to account for all of those things. The next step says you review themes. You check if the themes work in relation to the coded extracts and entire data set. Defining and naming themes, that's a fifth step. Refines the specifics of each themes, and also you write up the presentation of the found scheme. Oh, so the found theme. Okay, so those are the few steps you can follow. But colleagues, just to make you be aware, you don't have to follow the steps by these authors. There are many. I think also the fourth talks about the thematic analysis and the steps which can be followed there. So you can also use the latest sources, definitely. Okay. So what I'm trying to say sometimes, but most of the time, colleagues, what I've seen, especially remember this part, when you talk about thematic analysis, it forms under your chapter where you talk about the research methodology. All right. And we are trying to make sure that you don't give us the old sources, especially in regards to research. Okay? Because if in 2025, you are still telling me about Brown and Clark of 2006, that's a problem. Well, I'm sharing it from my side, but when you are writing up, colleagues, we should be looking at 2023 now. There should be some colleagues or scholars who have written about thematic analysis, and you can quote them from the 2023 research textbooks and so on. So what I'm trying to say, colleagues, we are very strict about especially the old source. Make sure that you don't give us the old source. Yes, there are areas. I was looking at one of the document I'm working on now. A colleague have cited, I think, a source of 1916. And the other one is 1926. Well, I don't have a problem with that because it's more on the theoretical framework. All right? It's about theories. That's it. We accept that. But if it was coming in a chapter of research methodology, then I'll have a problem with that. But now because it's about the theory, so we don't have a problem with that. Okay. Thank you, colleagues. I just want to emphasize that. Then let's quickly look at ethnographic content analysis. Okay. I think ethnographic content analysis is a qualitative research method also that combines ethnography with content analysis to understand the deeper meaning and context of communication within text, getting deeper to the roots of an issue, basically. Ethnography is a qualitative research method used primarily in social sciences. We use it more in social sciences, and yeah, I think also humanities, they also use it basically. Yeah, we use it in education, humanities, they use it, politics, they use it. I'm not sure about philosophy and so on, but I know about politics, okay? We use it also in education and the social sciences. To study cultures and communities in detail, all right, there's ethnography. It involves the researchers embedding themselves in the daily lives of study participants. That's ethnography, the daily life. If, for example, you say your study, it is orthoethnography. In other words, what we want to see in that study, we need to know more about you, okay? Because you're going to share your things which affect you directly, right? It's more personal, okay? And I think it's been allowed nowadays, yeah. Like I was giving the example about one person who have done a study, and I'm told that the study is orthographic, all right? Observing their behaviors and collecting data from interactions and interviewing. In other words, what I've seen, there's another colleague, I think she has done ethnographic study. In other words, the study was trying to unpack the issue of being deaf. I think she was the first female leader in a certain organization. And now she wanted to tell us what are the things she went through and so on and so on, and also giving her personal life. So in some of the chapters, people who know that person from the community, they were interviewed and so on and so on. In other words, you bring other people's in your own study, and it's a real situation, by the way. So yeah, it's a difficult type of a study which you can do sometimes, but if you are willing to do that, you do it, okay? So that we want to understand, we want people to understand who are you, okay? And I think nowadays, the people who are in politics, they are doing that more. In other words, they want us to understand them. And it's good. And we need to, in your case, colleagues, if you have a time, just try to source the study I was referring to. In fact, it's there on the media. I can even mention whose study I'm talking about. I think it's Mr. Maimane study. You know, is now heading one of the political parties in South Africa. I think it's going to be available. I don't know when it's going to be available. This is sooner. I don't know when, but you can try. But yeah, it's what I've read about also on the media last week. So, but I want also to read that thesis and understand this autoethnography. What is this about? Because I know about ethnographic studies. Now they bring the word auto. I don't know what does it mean, but it's fine. But through this, the norms, values, and motivations and social dynamics could be understood from the insider's perspective. Through ethnography, the researcher is viewed in the context of the content. The distinction between quantitative content analysis and ethnographic content analysis. A little bit of distinction is not a lot, but basically, when you look at quantitative content analysis, it is more on the surface. Example, the researcher might count the numbers of times a particular key word appears in a political manifesto of different parties. I think I've spoken about it a lot. But when you look at the ethnographic content analysis, it is much deeper, meaning the researcher will look beyond the keywords, okay? In other words, yes, there are the keywords, but what's the meaning? What's the implication of these keywords? They would like to understand the context and the tone underlying these keywords in the different political parties' manifestos. I think we've spoken about that one, that Definitely. Here, you need to look at the implication and the meaning. What does it mean? Okay. You look at also at the tone. I like the word tone underlining these keywords. Okay. For example, if I speak about these keywords now, which is more, we are in July, as a political leader, no one is going to follow you because the tone and the context, we are not caring for that type of a platform where we are about to cast our votes. But if I start to speak about all of this, of these phrases, definitely, starting from January, I'm telling you, you'll see them after January. After the first week of January, they'll start to talk about these phrases and all of this as they are speaking around the country and so on. The tone is ready because we know now, I think it's around April or May, if I'm not mistaken, we'll be casting our votes. So everyone is alert now, okay? So if you are a student, unfortunately, the discipline maybe doesn't allow you, but if you were in humanities and doing politics, that could be a good study, honestly. That could be a good study. Where we are looking at all of this, maybe you look at the different manifesto, starting maybe from the first term of office. That could be maybe during the Mandela time and so on. Then you can also do a construct analysis. It could be good. You say, okay, during the first office or term, these were the aspects which are coming from their presentation and all of this based on the manifesto. Then you take the last one. Okay, maybe the last one, the last office, which is office number 6 or 5, I don't know, something like that. But you look at the last one. You say, okay, let me just look at the last one and compare to the first term of office. Definitely, there will be a lot of things you're going to unpack from that type of a study. That could be interesting. Okay, but yeah, in your case, colleagues, we are in education, eh? So we don't do politics most of the time. Okay, let's quickly look at the steps for ethnographic content analysis. Few steps: you define the research questions, you select items for analysis. Step 2. Step 3, you try to immersing yourself in the context. Step 4, you develop initial categories. You code the data, you analyze the data, you write narratives, description to present findings. Then you also do reflective analysis. It's quite interesting about ethnographic content analysis. The steps to be followed. I like the last one. You do what you call reflective analysis. It's the last step, definitely. I think we can read more about all those steps in different writings. But yeah, interesting, colleagues. Let me just quickly go to what the colleagues have posted on the chat and see if maybe we can. All right, you are saying it will not be valid to use Brown and Clark of this. I need to use a reference more. Yes, honestly, think about 2006 Codex. It's how many years now? I don't know, it's how many years. It's been, yeah, but it's an old source. It's very old. But what I'm trying to say, I think I've indicated that to say you can use older sources, but for certain sections in your studies or chapters. There are chapters, colleagues, we don't expect you to use sources older than 10 years in those chapters. Look at your chapter on literature review. Okay, we don't expect you guys to use all sources there. And by all sources, colleagues, I'm saying sources which are, they should not be more than 10 years. And I'm telling you, if you do a proper literature study or review and use a correct platform to search or a correct searching platform for your data in regards to literature or sources regarding to literature in relevant to your discipline or your topic, you'll get also maybe the latest. Yes, maybe you could not get the latest sources within the South African context, but in other contexts, it should be. So we don't expect that, colleagues. Two, especially also in the section of your research design and methodology. Colleagues, I'm telling you now, you can go and check authors like Macmillan and so on. You may find that already at the library, there are textbooks which were published last year, 2024. You may find those textbooks. And remember that, colleagues, remember that when they publish a textbook, it doesn't mean that the content sometimes it changes. It also has some of the content, but they have maybe the editions, okay? So you can have the latest. You can get it online, you can get it from your library and so on. There should be the You can even get maybe from the published articles which have been peer reviewed, okay? So there should be the latest. So yeah, I think that's my thinking around that, colleagues, because remember that sometimes what you normally do, I've picked up maybe working with some international scholars. They use old sources, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in South Africa, I'm telling you, if you want to, let's say, for example, you've done with your maybe your master's, or you're working on your master's or your PhD and so on, and you say you want to publish a paper. Once you send it to one of the South African journals, and when they peer review your manuscript and they pick up that the sources are old, definitely they're going to query them. But if sometimes you send to the international journals, they don't even check the old sources. I don't know why, but I always try to use the current sources. They should not be less than 10 years and so on. In your case, definitely, it should not be more than 10 years, because remember that if I'm doing my master's now, let's say this year is my final year of my master's, the next day I graduate, fine, then I want to write the manuscript. And I started my master's 3 years ago. And I've used sources which are over 10 years. It means now my sources are almost 15 years old. Then I submit a manuscript with the same content. Then I'm going to have a problem with the sources. So let's try to have sources which are almost the latest, if possible, colleagues, in certain chapters, okay? But in other chapters, definitely, we allow that. You can even now, in 2025, you can cite Yogoski, and he talks about the scaffolding. He talks about the theory of the scaffolding. We cite Yogoski even now. Okay, so the source is old, but we also cite it even now. Okay, colleagues, I think those are the few points I can share from my side, and I really appreciate for your attendance. Thank you, guys, and all the best with the coming week. See you next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.